Okay, well, welcome everyone to our webinar today, Neuromarketing, Building More Effective Transportation Campaigns. And I'm Julie Bond. I'm the Program Manager for Best Workplaces for Commuters, and we're very excited to bring this webinar to you today. And I'm going to be joined by speakers who I will introduce in a moment, but we have Dr. Mahmooda Pasha, Dr. Robert Hammond, and Phil Winters as the moderator today on our session. So today's agenda includes the following. I'm going to just tell you a little bit about Best Workplaces for Commuters, the host today. I'll introduce our speakers and then turn the time over to them. And we'll have a lot of time for questions and answers. So again, you can see here, we love questions. You can type anytime into the Q&A box, and we'll answer those questions at the end, or some of them may be answered throughout by our speakers if they have time. And you can also chat to other attendees in the chat. And we had quite a few people sign up for this webinar, so we're looking forward to a really big crowd. And just a little bit about Best Workplaces for Commuters. I can see we have many members attending, along with a lot of industry professionals. And I'm happy to say that our 2024 list hit a new record. And so we have 4 categories of membership. You can see on the slide, we had 651 employers, 44 best sites, 67 universities, and a big thanks to those partners who help promote the program. And if you're interested in learning more, you can contact me anytime. I'll have my information in the chat. And you can also go to bestworkplaces.org and look at how you can become a member. It's really easy. You just go in and click the join. You can tell us about all those great commuter benefits you're offering. And our next list release is January 2025. So you have time to apply. Please apply before November 30th. And we have lots of great benefits that we offer you. So I'm going to move right into introducing our speakers, and then I'll turn the time over to Phil Winters, who is the moderator. And so first, let me introduce these speakers to you. So Dr. Mahmooda Pasha is an associate professor and the director for the World Health Organization Collaborating Center on Social Marketing and Social Change. All 3 are from the University of South Florida, so that is at the University of South Florida. Her research focus is social marketing, which is the application of marketing tools and strategies to change behavior for social good. And many of you may have taken the Social Marketing and Transportation Certificate program. With a focus on practice and translation, she works with communities to build capacity to improve behavioral outcomes. Mahmooda also teaches graduate level courses in social and behavioral sciences and social marketing. And again, she's the lead instructor for the Social Marketing and Transportation Certificate program. And we have Dr. Robert Hammond. He's a practitioner, scholar, and go-to market expert with over 30 years of global leadership experience in enterprise, strategy, product management, sales, and engineering. He has been at the epicenter of innovation throughout his career. He's working with both startups and mature companies, so he brings a lot of really great knowledge. He has worked at some of the world's most iconic global companies, including Microsoft, Motorola, Sprint, and General Dynamics. He is also the author of Avoiding the Carnage, a guidebook through sales transformation, and also academic publications in sales, corporate strategy, emotional artificial intelligence, and effective commuting. Today, Dr. Hammond is the director of the Center for Marketing and Sales Innovation at the University of South Florida. And then we have Phil Winters, who will moderate the session and was also involved heavily in the project. And he is our director of Transportation Demand Management of the Transportation Demand Management Program here at the Center for Urban Transportation Research, also known as Cutter. He established the Commuter Choice Certificate Program, which is the country's most comprehensive and longest running TDM-related training program. And then in partnership with the USF College of Health, he introduced with Dr. Pasha, the Social Marketing and Transportation Certificate, which helps transportation professionals across the country create local programs designed to affect travel behavior. I'd also like to mention he created our leading industry listserv, which many of you are members, back in 1998, which now has about 1,800 active members. So with those introductions, I'm going to turn the time over to the three of you, and we all look forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Julie. This
Hey,
is
are
Phil.
you filming with your dad? Did anyone feed dogs?
Okay. Yeah, if you'd please mute if you're not talking. I'd really like to welcome everybody quickly. I'm Phil Winters, as Julie introduced me. Thank you, Julie, for the introduction. I just wanted to remind you that yes, it will be recorded, and yes, copies of the slides will be made available. And also reinforce the idea that we're open for business with Q&A and chat in the chat. So I'll be monitoring those. We will address as many as we can in the hour that we have, and as well as you may be getting some answers in the Q&A during the course of the presentations. With that, let me turn it over to Mahmooda.
Yes, hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining this webinar. I'm excited to share with you some research that our group has been doing for the past year or so. As Phil mentioned, as I'm sharing the information, if there are any questions, please use a Q&A so that we can respond to them, or we'll respond to them during the question and answer session at the very end of the presentation. So what I'm going to share with you today is a story of collaboration, and it's collaboration that takes into account community engagement, application of technology, and the blending of diverse disciplines. Think public health, social marketing, transportation professionals, engineers, and information technology. Next slide. So the story starts with communication materials that I often saw associated with my work with the Center for Urban Transportation Research, or CUTR, at USF, and the work that CUTR does with commuter assistance programs throughout the state of Florida. These programs, as you all know, are designed to increase the use of transit and other forms of transportation. In other words, to counter the use of single occupancy vehicles, or SOVs, as you see here. Often, as I looked at these materials or information, I would often wonder, what is it that they're trying to do? Do they want you to pick up a coworker? Next slide. Or do they want you to be healthier? Next slide. Or this. These are just a few of the 121 different types of materials that we received when we asked commuter assistance programs from throughout the nation to share their products as a way to evaluate their work. So rather than focus on evaluating the CAPS programs as a whole, some of my colleagues were already working on that as part of CUTR. I decided, how about we evaluate the tools that they use to make a difference? Besides the use of apps, one big component is the creation of communication messages and materials disseminated via websites, through television, through break rooms, within buses, or even sent through emails. So these materials take various forms, but the intent is all the same. Communicate a message with a call to action, and see if it'll change behavior. So in the end result, less SOVs in the world. Next slide. So this endeavor with my colleagues from CUTR, the Florida Department of Transportation, and the USF Center for Marketing and Sales Innovation, you'll hear more about, led to the evaluation of commuter assistance program materials, or pre-testing of materials done after the fact. And as you saw in the poll at the very beginning, which asked how often do you do pre-testing, what it seems is that the majority of the population sometimes does it or has not really engaged in pre-testing materials prior to large-scale dissemination. And that's what we found when we reviewed the literature as well. So as transportation professionals, you often use marketing techniques to develop and disseminate materials with an emphasis often on the placement of the message so that you can get the greatest reach. But what we found lacking when we looked in the literature is a lack of testing of materials prior to wide-scale dissemination of those materials. As a result, this project sought to use neuromarketing techniques to ascertain the effectiveness of existing CAP communication materials and revise and retest the materials based on the insights that we gathered. Some of the questions we were interested in answering were related to the call to action, or what is it we want people to do, the aesthetic elements of the materials, the relevancy, and the likelihood that the materials lead to encouraging a behavior change. So before we get into what we did, let's talk about what do we mean when we say neuromarketing. So Dr. Hammond?
Awesome. Thank you, Mahmooda. So thrilled to have the opportunity to share with you all today some background information around what it is that we can use to create an objective measure as we look at these pieces of collateral. You can think of it as essentially that this is just like any other piece of advertising or communications materials that we would have, whether it's for an internal communication or external communication. It's a piece of marketing collateral. And so when we do that, we really would kind of like what we're trying to do is open the brain up a little bit and have an idea about what's happening inside. Well, we know that there's a lot of experiences that people have that color and bring a perspective to what it is that they're evaluating when they look at these pieces of material. And so what we want to do is we want to add some objective measures to the subjective measures that we've typically used. So we have in the poll, and notice that there are sometimes we don't do any, we're not doing pre-testing at all. But when we do pre-test, typically it's a subjective, it's a survey. We may run a focus group, or perhaps we're doing a survey of some kind through some kind of the tools that are used for collecting survey information, like a Survey Monkey or a Qualtrics survey or something like that, where we ask on scales from 1 to 5, how impactful was this ad? And there's all sorts of ramifications associated with that, with your sampling and did you ask the right people and relevant people the questions, but it's still subjective. And we have this, especially when we start talking about social marketing, these social desirabilities of how people want to be perceived. And so we would like to open this up and create a little bit more of an objective perspective, or at least add to our experiences and to our feedback some objective measures. So that's where the neuromarketing comes in. It's adding to the subjective work that we would have done before in our surveys or focus groups with some objective measures. And some of those objective measures that we can use, here in the picture, there's an EEG helmet that's being used there. We could also do things with eye tracking, and that's the primary source that we used in this particular study. We could look at facial expression analysis and get an understanding of how people's emotional perspectives were of particular advertisements. We could also use galvanic skin response, and that's where we're looking at the emotional arousal that comes up. And so these are all different tools that we have for assessing objectively what someone may be experiencing when they look at a piece of marketing collateral. So the EEG piece is kind of, you may have heard around the functional MRIs. That's kind of a follow-on of that. This is looking at how do we actually, what the brain waves are doing and how people react to it. And so you have different sensors that are looking at which parts of the brain light up. The facial expression analysis is looking at, if somebody is surprised, right? Their eyes get bigger, the mouths open up. And so you're looking at those facial action units and then taking that information and turning that into a positive or a negative emotion. Or you're looking at the actual facial action unit itself, the eyebrow raise, the lip press, nose flare, things like that. And then you could also bring those together and, in theory, come up with a connection of how is that person's emotional state, or what emotion might they be feeling. So it's not exactly the same thing as what the person would react to or say was their emotion, but it's a representation of what was the facial expression looking like. And then galvanic skin response gives us an idea of the amount of emotion that's there. And that's really just measuring the connectivity between your fingers. So, like when you're getting ready for a job interview or something, you get a little clammy, right? A little bit nervous. Maybe you're getting ready to do a webinar and you start getting a little anxious about what you're going to be presenting. And so in that sense, your skin tends to get a little bit more moist, and we can measure that. And so by calibrating that, we can understand how aroused someone is emotionally based on that content. So by bringing these sensors together, we get a better sense of objectively what someone may be experiencing when we look at the materials. And so that's what we did in this study, was we looked at the eye tracking, and we looked at the subjective data from surveys. And we'll talk more about that, obviously, as we move on. But I'd like to give you a couple of examples of what that data might look like first, as we move through it. In the Center for Marketing and Sales Innovation, we have one of the larger biometric behavior labs that are out there. And we have the EEG, or the brain waves, the eye tracking, the facial expression, and the galvanic skin response equipment. We also have the capability of collecting this kind of data remotely for eye tracking and for facial expression. And we do quite a bit of work with the social marketing groups because we need to talk about particular segments or particular populations. And so it's important to have those kinds of tools to be able to access them as well. So one of the things that you do when you do these eye tracking activities is that you want to look at what particular parts people are looking at. So over here on the right-hand side, kind of in the broader sense, we talk about eyes, eye gaze mapping or a gaze mapping or a heat map or Bumblebee charts or things like that we use for doing that. And so on the right-hand side, what you're seeing is a collection of people, and this would be some segment of the sample or the population that was part of the study. And what you do is you segment that population based upon, obviously, whatever demographics or components that you would like to. If you're looking at particular age groups or genders or locations, you can segment your data, and then you can create these charts. And so obviously the red part is the hottest part. That's the one where most people looked at. And then you can move on to no color at all, which would be the least amount, and then yellow and green in between. And so that's a heat map. That's what that particular image is. And you can see it would be a web page in this sense. So what did people look at and where did they spend the most time? On the left-hand side of this page, we have areas of interest. And so what you do is you take your materials and you may look at this semantically, or maybe you look at it as in the geometry of the web page or the collateral or whatever it is that you're happening to be presenting. It could be a web page, could be a video, could be a PDF or a piece of collateral. And you look at that and you say, okay, I want to understand how many people or how long people or which people or where did they mouse click. But whatever metrics I want to look at, I want to have quantified metrics around what was happening in these specific areas of interest or AOIs. And so what we did with this particular collateral is we took the image and we said, okay, well, the masthead on the web page, I'd kind of like to know how many people go and look at that, or how many times they revisit that, or how long they looked at that. And then we'll look at this, each one of these key blocks that are there, the image of the individual, the content, and then the content blocks down below, and looked at those in each one of them. And then that gives us some idea about how much time people spent and how involved they were with that piece of the material that was on that page. It also gives us an idea of what order people looked at on the page. The time to first fixation gives us an understanding of how we're moving on that. An example of a study that I was involved with where we used a lot of that work was looking at menus, for example, of how did you progress through the menu. Less relevant in terms of the collateral, unless you're worried about someone looking at for just a short period of time. Well, then I want to put that material first. I'd like to know what they looked at first. So on the right-hand page, we have something where we have how long did they look at it or how much they focused on it. By using the areas of interest, we can also understand if someone only looked at it for 5 seconds or 15 seconds or something like that, how far into the content did they get? And that would give us an indication by looking at that material, or how long they looked at it. And these are all essentially getting ideas of the amount of interest that someone has. You can understand for a moment, if you think about it, that if I ask you what you said, well, one, I'm getting a collective response. At the end of the material, I've looked at it, now I'm telling you what I did. Well, people don't remember, and I don't get the temporal perspective of throughout the time they were looking at it, what kind of reactions were they having, or what were they doing when they had those reactions. This gives us both visibility into their experience of examining the material, but then also objectively what they actually experienced with the material itself. Okay, let's go to the next slide. We have a couple of videos for you. All right, so let's do this first one. And we can get the mute button on that one if you don't mind too, on the right-hand side first. Okay, great. So what we're looking at here is at the same time, what we have is on the top of the page is the image, and then we're looking at the fixations that are taking place. So you have two different ideas of how we look at data. One is the fixation for how long you looked at it. The other one is the gaze map of what I was looking at when the screen was actually refreshed. So those are two different perspectives, and I'm going to show you both of those. So on that left-hand side, on the top of the page, we have fixation. So the size of the bubble was how long I looked at it. The tail is what we call a saccade or a saccade, and that's the movement from one fixation to the next. And then down below, we had examples of the facial expression analysis. So I could look at the same time what someone's facial expressions were, and I could see what they were looking at and were they concentrating on it. So if you don't mind, why don't we replay that one more time? So go ahead and just hit the play button on the right-hand side one more time for us. And so again, you can see the size of the bubbles on the top. So the longer I'm on that bubble, the more it is. And also you can get the idea of the order of what transpired. And then you'll notice that there's some bubbles there. Obviously, I'm reacting a little bit intentionally so we have something to show, but there on the bubbles there are the trace lines down below. And obviously, I was the participant in that particular study for us as a demonstration. Then on the second one, and let's remember to mute this one for us. There's a little bit of audio in this one. So here on this one, what we have is a video of all of the people that were looking at this particular piece of collateral in the analysis that we're looking at. And so it's over time, but it's a static piece of material. So the timing is somewhat interesting in the sense of what one person might look at versus another. So we call this one kind of a beehive plot in the sense that it's for every screen refresh that takes place, where was that person looking on that particular page? A better example of that is actually our next page. And this is a video that we have. And we'll just go ahead and let this one play. It's a rideshare application. So go ahead.
Using the Shift Tampa Bay app has never been easier. Record your trips around Tampa and claim rewards. Carpooling, walking, or taking the bus are all ways you can receive a reward. Claim rewards at your favorite spots like Papa John's, Checkers, and more. It's super easy and you'll be saving money, saving gas, burning calories, and lessening your carbon footprint. Download Shift Tampa Bay today and start saving.
All right, so we call this a gaze plot. And what's interesting about that particular page is you saw there were multiple dots at any moment in time. Since it's a video, everybody's seeing the same thing at the same time. And what we're able to then say is, what were people looking at when that particular image was on the page? And what individuals were looking at. We can also go back and look at what one group or an individual was looking at, and was it something different, or perhaps it was some data error or something like that that might be why they were not looking at the particular material we thought they were. But it gives us, again, visibility to what people were looking at. And then the competition, as you were looking at some of that material, you had movement in the materials, but then you had the actual content on the one side, but movement on the other side. And the eyes went to the movement, and we would lose them in looking at the content. So that kind of visibility is something that you can get from being able to do this level of eye tracking and work. So Mahmooda, why don't you go ahead and take us through what we did with our study?
All right, great. Thank you. So now I'm going to present with you our overall study. So now that you have a bit of basic understanding of what is neuromarketing and how we went about using it. So this screen is just basically laying out with you the process that we use. So the process that we used for our work was community engaged approach that integrated the voice, the needs, and choices of the stakeholders. And likewise, at the end, we brought the results back to the audience, the stakeholders, and you'll see that take place as we go through the slides. Next slide. So the very first part of our study involved engaging the stakeholders, and that includes commuter assistance program leads or leaders, not only in Florida, but also across the United States. And what we did is we had a webinar where we brought them all together. And within this, we shared with them our purpose for the research that we were doing. And then we worked with them in helping us to brainstorm what are the various calls to actions that are often used within the CAP materials, and for them to help us to brainstorm what those consist of. And then also we asked them to help us in brainstorming the type of audiences that they have and the types of materials that they're usually using. So those could be flyers, websites, apps, any type of material. So we were trying to get an idea of what exists prior to us then actually selecting the ones that we were going to do. Next slide. So we had this process that we engaged over a couple of months using email and other resources to solicit materials from all of these stakeholders. In the end, collaboratively, we identified and categorized around 121 communication materials. And these were based on audiences, we categorized them, and based on call to action. There were around 9 different calls to action that we were able to categorize these materials under. And some of the examples are shared with you here on the slide, where it was asking someone to register, enroll, or attend something. It was encouraging someone to change their mode of transportation, or it was asking them to download a particular app. But once it's downloaded, specific calls to actions were related to logging or tracking their miles or their trips, as well as then redeeming the points that they would accrue to get rewards off of them. And so we couldn't necessarily test 121 materials. So again, we went back to the stakeholders and we categorized all the materials according to audience as well as to the different calls to actions. And we asked them to prioritize and rank the materials in relation to the ones that they were using themselves, but also ones that they thought were effective from their own perspective. So in the end, we were able to narrow from 121 materials down to 15 communication materials with distinct call to action. So next slide. This is, I don't expect you to see all the detail on here, but this is just showing you the types of materials that were in the end selected. There were around 15. 3 of those were actually videos that were selected at the end. And so these materials were then pushed forward towards the neuromarketing and the testing. So next slide. So our neuromarketing work took 2 different phases. So I'm going to share with you round 1 and then round 2 and the process, and then Dr. Hammond will walk you through the responses. So the round 1 of the neuromarketing looked at eye tracking with the areas of interest as well as the eye gaze mapping, which was shown to you in this slide before. So next slide. So in round 1, we recruited around 66 participants from the USF's panel, SOMA panel. And so the communication materials that we showed you, and you're seeing the blocks here, were randomly assigned to 3 groups. And each group consisted of 4 print materials and 1 video. And that's what is being shown. And the study participants reviewed these materials and answered a series of questions and surveys before and after viewing the materials. And these questions were looking at comprehension, acceptability, relevance, as well as persuasiveness. So this was round 1 of testing that we did. So next slide. Once the round one of neuromarketing testing was complete, we evaluated the results of that the testing and looked at the materials as a whole. From those materials, using the results, we narrowed the list down to 4 specific ads, which are the ones that you see represented here. These particular ads then were sent to a graphic artist, was part of our team, and this graphic artist made revisions to these materials based on best practices, but also information that we received in the results from round 1 of the testing. And so we used that feedback to improve upon these 4 products. And then these 4 products were then sent through another round of neuromarketing testing. So round 2 of the testing. Next slide. So these revised materials were retested using the same conditions from round 1 of neuro testing. And here we now did this testing with around 16 participants that we recruited. And this age group was slightly older in demographics. It went from around 21 to 68 years of age. And so it was a slightly older demographic, but still the results were important for the work. And then also we made some revisions to the survey to work better with the technology and the updates that had taken place at that time. So now I'm going to actually move this on to Dr. Hammond for him to share with you examples from just one of the results, and then we'll engage you in an activity as well. So Dr. Hammond, back to you. Oh, Rob, you're on mute.
Yep, my light didn't roll up. So thank you, Dr. Pasha. So what we're going to talk about here is the first part of this is going to be what did we see when we did the eye tracking? And then I'm going to give you the changes that we made as a result of that eye tracking and subjective survey work. And then we'll show you the results of the before and after, as well as the before and after associated with the survey data. And again, I want to stress that this is really a combination of work. The neuromarketing or the eye tracking work by itself tells part of a story. The surveys tell part of the story. And when we bring those 2 things together, we get a more complete picture, a better understanding of what might be going on or what people are thinking. And so, the first question that comes to mind when we look at this ad is, what is this about? Right? Get their challenge, make Oregon even better. So one of the things you may notice is that these 2 young professionals perhaps are having a conversation. They're carrying a couple cups of coffee. We're not sure whether maybe this is a recycling ad. Is this what kind of a piece of collateral is this actually getting to? And when we ask those subjective questions, we asked questions like, who would you think this ad was for? How do you think this ad impacted? What was the key message associated with this ad? What was it that you were trying to accomplish with this ad, right? And or what do you think we were trying to accomplish with this piece of collateral? And so these were subjective questions or survey questions that we would ask. And then we have this data associated with the eye tracking. So one of the things that you'll notice when you look at eye tracking is that people like faces, right? That's the nature of why it is that we communicate socially, and we're looking for people's faces. And so faces are usually going to be a dominant thing. White space also is usually something that brings in. And here, white space in the sense that there's really nothing going on the right-hand side, right-hand 60% or so of the page. Now, one question might be is there a better way to leverage that content or leverage that real estate? Another would be is, how do I move from having so much focus on these faces to the message that I want to have delivered? You may also notice that there's a little bit of a pattern associated with this. You have this left masthead where all of this content tends to be focused, and then you have this scan across the top. Well, in the practitioner literature that's out there, there's actually a fair amount of research, particularly around web pages, that talks about an F pattern. Now, that may not be consistent with all navigation, but it is this kind of idea that we tend to start in the upper left and we read across. And the further down we go to the page, the less effort we made to go across the page. That there's a task here, right? It's not that I'm trying to read this entire page. I'm trying to get the sense of the material. That's kind of the task that I'm doing. So there's a conservation of effort associated with it. So as we looked at this material, we ask ourselves that first question is like, well, what are we really trying to accomplish? We came up with the sets of questions that we're going to ask, and then we came back from that material, and then we made the modifications associated with it. So let's move on to the next slide. Okay, so in this next slide, what we took a look at was, the first thing was, if you remember, that heat map showed that there was a lot of focus on the faces. Well, if the people are going to look at the faces, is there an opportunity for us to use that predisposition to take advantage of that and then put some specific significant piece of material there, because there's so much focus on that. Another thing we wanted to do was move off of this idea of the coffee cup on that bottom right-hand side and take advantage. Again, if somebody's going to look there, let's put some material there. So you'll notice that there's a Get There Challenge logo down there on the side of it. You'll notice that there was a QR code that was added. And then we were also very deliberate about what was the intent here. Drive alone less, use transportation options more. A very clear communication of what was this for? What was the point of this ad or this communication piece of collateral? And then what did we want people to actually do? What's the call to action? The call to action was, let's unlock your achievements. So when you look on the left-hand side, you have the original, which was the Let's Make Oregon Even Better, Get Their Challenge with the date, and then the Get Their Challenge, and then not much on the right-hand 60% of the page. And you'll notice that the changes that we made associated with that from the heat map, informed by the heat map, is this idea of putting the win prizes and the dates associated between the two women speaking, moving the logo branding over the side, taking advantage of a QR code, if someone were to go look at that, and then being very clear that although this ad may have been part of a campaign with multiple ads and a branding element, if you only saw this one ad or this one piece of collateral, you wouldn't really understand what it was about. And so by making those changes, we ended up having a pretty significant impact associated with this ad or this piece of collateral. So let's move to the next page and look at the results. So here on the left-hand side, we have some of the questions that we asked. This isn't all of them, but it's a smattering of some of the more informed or bigger items, I think, to communicate. And then we have these elements associated with what happened with the heat map. So I want to start first on the right-hand side with the heat maps. So you'll notice first off that the faces are less interesting than they were before. We've taken and moved this interest that were in the faces over towards our key message, which was win prizes, and then the specific data associated with it. We also moved off of that coffee cup that the woman on the right was holding in her left hand and onto the brand element that we were looking for in the bottom right-hand part of the page. So we got the branding attribution we were looking for and moved off of a less important piece of information that was on the page and the coffee cup. And then you'll notice as well that we have a better sense, I think, of what the two things were. People spent time looking at what the reason was and then the call to action associated with it. And they were focused in those spaces. One thing you have to be careful when you look at the eye tracking is eye tracking is both a level of interest, but it could also be a level of confusion. And that's where the facial expression element comes in. If I look at something for a long time, it might be that I was just confused by it or it was difficult to understand, as opposed to I was interested in it. And so this is why we have to kind of use the subjective data that comes from the surveys, as well as the material from eye tracking and perhaps other sensors as well. So how did it do? Right? Good question. Well, by comparing the heat maps, we could have a good sense that maybe we did okay. But the story, I think, is a little stronger when we take a look at the actual survey results and the quantitative outcome from that. So the first one would say is, what do you think this ad is telling you to do? Well, we moved from 5 to 56% of the respondents understood that it was to redeem or to join something, which was 24 to 59%. So, more than half, 50%, 51% move up in redeem rewards or points. And then download an app, again, moved up. So all three dimensions moved up by, 30 to, 39 or 35 to 45%-ish as you're talking about the numbers and moving improvement. And what does this communication material say you will get if you participate? We moved from 19 to 63% of the people and from 5 to 38 on rewards and points. Again, because we were explicit, but the original ad didn't have that level of content in it. And then I think most telling and perhaps most importantly, to me anyway, as a marketer, is this idea of, do I believe this ad is for me? Right? Because that's going to be a direct impact in terms of me taking action on it. If it's for somebody else, it's kind of like when a focus group and they say, I think this would be great for somebody else. You're looking for that person to say, I am interested in that material. And so I'm most interested in this one where the individual responds back with, from 52% to 88% of the participations. So just a few people out of that respondent group thought that it wasn't applicable to them. And so in that sense, I think we get a nice view then of kind of how we use these two different dimensions to be able to bring that material together, the subjective and the objective data, and create a more complete picture and understanding of these particular materials. And of course, the impact is, if you didn't do any of that pre-testing and you took that original piece of collateral out and put it in market, you would have potentially had a less effective ad. So either left ridership perhaps, or less impact, or less knowledge, or less attention, less brand attribution, all of those elements, because we wouldn't have known that people were thinking it was about recycling, or that they thought the ad was for somebody else other than them. And this informed us and gave us an opportunity to do that kind of insight. So with that in mind, let's make this a little bit more participatory. Okay, and I want to stop talking to you all and let's have a conversation about this. So we're going to use the chat for this. And what I'd like to do is let's go ahead and move to the next slide. In your chat, please make sure you respond to all so everybody can see the responses that everybody's bringing in. And what I'd like for us to do is to think about this first question first. So go ahead and type this one in, if you will. When you see this piece of collateral, what do you see first? Like, what is it? Which part of that do you look at? And just kind of check on yourself as you're looking at this. And we're going to create a self-reported heat map out of the data from everybody who they're responding. Okay, so take a moment for that one and go ahead and bounce that one in. I see get your rewards first. Get your rewards, win $100. There's somebody out for my heart. Clean commute. Yeah. Get your rewards, win $100. What else do you see? So far, no one's has commented on anything below the top half of the page. The house icon in the bottom right. Did you know it was a house? What else do you think about that icon? What does that icon try to tell us, that house in the bottom right? Wi-Fi, there you go.
Teleworking also.
Telemarketing, okay.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. Telecommute, maybe, telework, okay. So you all are responding essentially like our respondents did, right? If I were to take a sampling of all of those, right, those responses, they would look a lot like the heat map was for this piece of collateral. And we have what the heat map actually looks like here in a moment. So we'll share that with you and you guys can see what it actually looks like. But yes, what you typically will find is that people are going to scan or review more or less, it's not the very top when they're looking for something. It's kind of a sense-making activity. And so they're going to kind of come in that middle area around it. So we have this branding around the DE commute solutions that's occupying space right in the center of the page in the top part. And that's going to bring in eyes and attention to that piece of it. Then we have the get rewards. And then you have visit, record, and redeem. Nobody kind of mentioned the visit, rewards, and redeem, but that's actually the call to action that we're looking for, right? And so then, what do you all think? Well, I foreshadowed that one, didn't I? Yeah. What do we think is what we're asking people to do here? What is it that you actually want someone to do? That's an insider. Log sustainable commutes. There's somebody that actually that's from the industry, I think. Log trips, track trips. Go to the website, visit, record, redeem. Yeah. Go to the website, download the app, participate. Okay. And then if you had the opportunity, just knowing what we've shared so far, what would you want to change about this piece of collateral? Or where do you think there might be opportunities to change on this collateral?
Okay, so QR code, make it less visually busy.
CTA up. Another one. Less text, more clear communication.
More white space.
Add a QR code. I like that one. Simplify messaging. It feels busy. The logo's too large. Did you notice that there's actually 3 logo attributions on the page? Okay. Well, great work, guys, everyone. Great work. I think you're kind of coming there. So what we want to do is we're going to bring you into the close here on these last couple of slides. So let's go ahead and move to the next slide. So here is the heat map of the original piece of collateral. And as we said, kind of what do people look at? They look at right there in the center of the page first. And that's that. And they really stayed there. You can see the areas of interest that we did draw around this one that are kind of semantic in the sense it's, what was interesting about that piece. And now let's move to the next page of what was the change that we made. So you'll probably feel it's a little cleaner. There's less noise in the page. And we really wanted to be like what the real call to action, which was download, record, and redeem, right? That's what we were looking for. We also wanted the $100 and other prizes to be much more noticeable. So it's bigger. The branding moved to the bottom, and the win is broader. It's larger font, and it's separated with more space around it so that we were able to grab more of an attention associated with it. And so just like in the other one we showed earlier, we have the subjective data from the surveys and the people's responses along with these changes with the heat maps, and we can bring that together to say, okay, was it in fact better or not? You also notice that we changed some of the icons up so that they're related to the call to action, as opposed to telework. When I really want you to focus on is downloading, recording, and redeeming, right, and getting money from that. That's the purpose around this piece of collateral, as opposed to all of the broader senses of here are my different ways to commute. So we stayed relevant within the content itself. So with that in mind, I'm going to let Dr. Pasha bring us home and finish up. Oh, I'm sorry, I have one more.
No, there's one more slide.
Yeah, we have one more. And so here's what the eye tracking turned into as a result of that piece of work. So we have a good heat map moved from really one intense location with just a very little amount of understanding of the piece of material to drawing broader heat around the attribution that we've got. So people actually knew who it was from. And we've got a lot of attention around what the call to action is, as well as the win prizes. So people were able to kind of understand where we're at. So you see how we moved from the prior or the pre-work original piece of collateral to this refined piece or changed piece, updated piece, as a result of being informed by that the research. Okay. All right, Dr. Pasha.
Yep. So next slide. So as I shared with you our process, so this was a community engaged process. We started with stakeholders, we did the round 1 and round 2 of testing, and then the goal was that we wanted to share these results back with the commuter assistance program community and the stakeholders that were engaged in helping us to identify the materials. And as I was seeing some of the comments that were coming for the changes and things, what you'll notice is that we tried to do the best that we could in making the changes. Like, you can't address every audience and all the preferences that you have, but you can try to do the best in terms of communicating exactly what you want. So we came up with some guidelines that we shared with the stakeholders and guidelines that we've shared in a paper that is currently under review for this work as well. And some of the key things is what Dr. Hammond already mentioned, is that, front load the important information. So right in the front, in the main space where people focus, you could ask, use formatting techniques like lists. So the bullets, I think we had a question pertaining to that. It seems like someone said that it seems like there's a focus on lists or bullets, but yes, using lists or bullets helps in people seeing the materials. Also using different types of techniques of bolding and not bolding, having the white space, which is what some of you mentioned, colors and boxes to draw attention to specific places. The other thing is that you should take advantage of the classic gaze pattern. So as Dr. Hammond shared in terms of the F, in terms of how we look at information and trying to make sense of it. And then related to the icons, in terms of not muddying the water, place logos, branding, QR codes out of the way of the specific message that you want to get across. Those are, yes, those are important, but those are not necessarily the call to actions in terms of what you want the consumer to be doing. And so don't, make it all busy with that. So when we started off with this, still on the previous slide, so when we started off on the study, we had hypothesized that the use of eye tracking and eye gaze mapping coupled with traditional marketing research technique could help us to improve the effectiveness of the communication materials. Qualitatively, we were able to show this change as on average, material effectiveness improved by 24% in the following domains of comprehension, attractiveness, acceptability, relevancy, and persuasiveness. And so now let's move to how our sharing of the results with our stakeholders led to a small success story that we heard back from this. So let's go to the next slide. So an early example of the impact of this work and a real-world application was observed following a webinar that we did at the end of the study and sharing the results back with the stakeholders. A webinar participant, South Florida Commuter Services, used the guidelines that we shared, the ones that I shared, to edit communication materials related to the uptake of a voucher for first and last mile access project. The participants shared that their department achieved over 300% improvement in conversions to the project's new program, and his conclusion was based on the changes introduced into the communication materials, which led to commuters taking advantage of the flyers who were ready to make a change, so kind of segmentation, but also it connected with them in a way that the consumer has sought. And so this is just one example that was shared with us in terms of what they anecdotally shared in terms of the impact that the research may have made onto their work. So next slide. So before we go into the question and answer session, I really would like to thank the Florida Department of Transportation that funded this study. And then of course, the following stakeholders and contributors who provided the materials for the study and also were engaged in helping us to review the materials, select the materials, but then also in, receiving the results and taking it back to their own particular community. So we really would like to thank them for all that they did. And then last slide, and I believe this is just our contact information for all of the team. So if you have additional questions, comments, or want this work to be brought to your workplace, then please feel free to reach out to us. We would be happy to participate with you. So now I think we're going to move on to the question and answer. So I'll move it to Phil to moderate.
Thank you, Mahmooda. Thank you, Rob. A lot of questions coming in. I hope to get all of them. If not, we'll respond later. We may even go a little bit long, a few minutes longer. One of the questions was the heat map seemed to consistently show a focus on lists. Is that generally true with these studies?
So again, highlight that one. Recognize that it could be confusion, right? Or it could be interest. So the heat map is really how much time, how many fixations. So we talk about fixations and we talk about scans and gaze points. And so the fixation is a length of time that someone looked at a particular area. And so we're counting the number of fixations that are in a particular area. If there's a list, you're likely going to have people look at that list a longer period of time because they're reading the list, right? And particularly in this kind of a research where you're asking someone to answer questions about a piece of communication that you put in front of them, they're going to look at that material even longer than they would in the field. And that's one of the trade-offs you always have, right? With the laboratory environment not exactly matching what you're going to have in the ecological experience of being out in the field. So you're going to see heat maps around lists that are not consistent with people actually being interested in them as much as they just spent time reading them.
All right. Thank you, Rob. Another question is, why were the demographics changed for the second round of neural mapping? Because it was the second group.
Yeah.
I think we just shared that it wasn't purposefully selected in that manner. It's more that we have a panel and we had other ways of recruiting participants. And so it's just more from the ones who volunteered and were available. And so we've provided the demographic characteristics of it, but it wasn't purposefully done in the sense of like, we're switching now the group that we're going to be collecting from. Rob?
Yeah, I'd also say that it doesn't impact it doesn't impact the study in any way because those are really independent activities. We're talking about humans and eye tracking. And so you're going to get that piece of the element of it. And then the subjective elements of it, of course, you're right. There are some demographics and somebody may be interested or not because of their particular of it. But given the target for these communication materials didn't have a specific demographic that we needed to follow, it was a sample of convenience. And we were able to use that. And the objective data is going to be from the eye tracking is going to be consistent. People tend to do the things that they're going to do from that.
Okay. Several people are basically asking who does this and where can they find people to help them do this type of work?
Rob, do you want to go ahead?
I will let you handle that one.
Well, we have the center that Rob shared at the very beginning, and the center has a lab. Is one of the, I think it's like one of the largest labs in the U.S. and in addition to another one that someone else has. And so we have this resource here at the University of South Florida, and it is available for use. And so I think if you are interested in this, you can reach out to Dr. Hammond. But then also if it has a kind of a component of us trying to understand a phenomena or to set up something of this sort, you can also reach out to myself, the Phil Winters or others, and we would work collaboratively together with Rob in the sense of kind of putting that piece together.
I can add to that is that we do collaborate with industry and with individuals as it relates to it's obviously it's a cost for us to be able to do this kind of work. And so we need to figure out, again, is this something that's a broader issue that we can resolve on? We don't try to be a commercial facility, right? I would say it that way, right? That's not our goal here. Our goal is to support the social marketing activities of it and the research and find these findings of coming up with these best practices and sharing those so that you're able to implement them at scale. It's not practical to do this with every piece of collateral, with everything that everyone generates. It's just too time consuming. But I do believe that if you are creating an instrument or if you're creating a large communications program where it's expensive and you have a lot of effort that's going into that, or it's a major portion of your budget, then I think it makes a tremendous amount of sense to pre-test. And then it's a question of how far down that pre-testing do you go? Do you do the surveys? And is that sufficient? Do you do surveys and focus groups? Do you do a focus group or survey first? Do you follow on with that and look at particular segmentation? Or do you go all the way down this path of saying, okay, we're going to do some eye tracking work, but we're going to do it online? Or do we go as far as coming to the laboratory and actually taking control of the environment and doing the work there? And that's, I think, a needle that you turn dependent upon the importance and expense that you're going to incur in the process. As it relates to this particular body of work, we very much like working with the College of Public Health and the College and the Center for Urban Transport Research. There's such competency that these organizations have for us to be able to work within those particular domains. We do work with other industries directly and other groups at the university in taking this as an asset and making it available as a resource to the community.
Now, Rob, could they also find this at, say, commercial ad agencies or?
Yeah, depends on the agency and whether they have these kinds of sets of capabilities. We are in the top 5 largest laboratory capabilities, including both commercial and academic institutions that are out there with the assets and the capabilities that we have. So some individuals may have a single testing station where they can put one person in front of it and see what they get responses to. Scale does matter with this kind of research. You need to get to a certain number of respondents so that you don't end up having an outlier that's driving your entire findings. So kind of a decision to be made, but yeah, certain agencies, content groups, content producers, again, the larger the agency, the more likely they're going to have either a relationship with someone or the assets in-house.
Yeah, now we didn't use or didn't have the capability, I don't know, you can correct me, to have remote participation. You mentioned that earlier, right? Is that
we did
becoming
not
more
use
of
that in, yeah, we did not use that in this research. The reality, you can think about really it boils down to, you'll get better data in the lab because you have better control of the environment. But if you have a sample that you're trying to get that is unique, we do quite a bit of work with the College of Public Health around social marketing with other types of elements like tobacco and vaping and some work like that, where we're working with particular segments of the population that would be difficult to get to a lab per se. And in those cases, it's really useful to have that online capability and collect data because although it may not be, it's dirtier data, right? Due to the vagaries of the environment, the yields are lower, but you wouldn't be able to get their data at all if you didn't have access to that online tool set. So it's just a different tool for a different application. And we're fortunate here at the University of South Florida that we have access to both.
And Mahmooda, about kind of on the concept of pre-testing, who should they be pre-testing with?
So the pre-testing should be done with the audience that the material is designed for, the ones that you actually want to either access a service, access a product, or change their behavior. So the pre-testing should be done with the audience that it is specifically designed for.
Not your colleagues, in other words, right?
Yeah, not people in your business or your coworkers. Even if they fit the criteria. So for example, in this study, we excluded anybody who would had who worked for the Florida Department of Transportation or had worked at one time or something of that sort, because if you are working in that field or in that entity, you're predisposed to be thinking about this in a manner, in one way. And so then we wouldn't be getting information how we would like it to be. And so, yes, you should test with the audience that the material is intended for, always.
Okay. I think we're at the end of today's presentation. I thank everybody for attending. Also, special thanks to Mahmooda and Rob for taking their time to do the presentation. Mahmooda mentioned we have one paper that should be out hopefully soon, and we'll be able to share it once it gets accepted by the editor. Any final comments, Mahmooda or Rob?
No, and I'm just going to encourage, yeah, thank you very much. And just please contact us if you have any more questions or comments.
And as a consumer, thank you for all of your hard work and all the work you do every day. We're all very fortunate to have you be part of our lives.
Julie?
I just wanted to say thank you, everyone, for participating. And Christine has put the survey the evaluation in the chat. So she'll send that out also, but you can click on that evaluation that is in your chat right now. And we'd really be happy to hear from you through the evaluation. And